You think you are marrying a woman. That is the first and most forgivable mistake you will make. You are marrying a woman, yes, but she comes bundled, like a phone plan you did not fully read, with a mother, a grandmother, 4 aunts of ambiguous blood relation, a preacher, a casserole rotation, and an entire county's worth of people who will refer to you, warmly and permanently, as her husband, as though your first name was a phase. On paper, you fell in love. In practice, you are being absorbed. And the strangest part is how good it feels going down. 1. The welcome. The first thing you learn is that Southern hospitality is real, and that it is also a system. You arrive braced for suspicion, and instead get fed. There is sweet tea before you've sat down, a plate before you've said you're hungry, and a grandmother who decides within 90 seconds whether you are a good one, a verdict she will never state and never revise. You mistake all this warmth for acceptance. It is not acceptance. It is evaluation with really excellent snacks. Every "aren't you sweet" is a data point. Every second helping you decline is noted, gently, forever. You will be talked about in the car on the way home, not cruelly, just thoroughly. And the report will reach your wife before you've finished loading the dishwasher. And you love it. That's the thing. After whatever cold, transactional dating landscape you crawled out of, being fed and fussed over and folded into a family feels like coming in from weather. You are used to love that has to be earned in installments. This love arrives pre-approved, on the sole condition that you never, ever make a scene. You start dressing a little better for Sunday. You start saying "yes, ma'am" without irony. You catch yourself hoping the grandmother liked you, the way you once hoped a girl would text back. You have been in the family 4 days, and you are already auditioning for it. Nobody tells you that the welcome is the honeymoon. You think it's the baseline. It is the high point, and you are standing in it, holding a plate of something with 3 kinds of cheese, feeling chosen. 2. You didn't marry a woman, you married a county. There's a number that explains your whole new life, and no one will ever say it to you out loud. Nationwide, the typical American lives about 18 miles from their mother. In the South, one analysis of census data found the median distance between adult siblings and their parents is roughly 6 miles. Families cluster tightest in the Northeast and the South. The West Coast is where people go to get away. You did not know you were opting into 6 miles. You thought you were marrying a person with her own apartment and her own opinions. You slowly understand that her apartment was a satellite office, and the headquarters is 15 minutes down the road, and headquarters expects you Sunday. This is not a bug. 3/4 of Americans say living near family matters to them, and more than a third call it very important. And in the South, that instinct hardened into architecture generations ago. Her mother didn't move away because moving away was never on the menu. Cousins bought houses on the same road. An aunt lives in what everyone still calls the old place. You married into a settlement, and you are the new arrival who talks a little funny and doesn't yet know which casserole dish belongs to whom. You learn to text her mother back within the hour. You learn that a missed family gathering is not a scheduling conflict. It is a statement, and you didn't mean to make one. You learn that "we should have everyone over" is not a suggestion. It is a weather event, and you are already inside it. The intimacy is real, and it is enormous. You will never again wonder if anyone would show up if something went wrong. 40 people would show up, with food, and stay too long, and you'd be grateful and exhausted in exactly equal measure. You wanted to be part of something bigger than yourself. Careful what you pray for down here. It's usually listening. 3. The Lord is part of this marriage now. You may not have known you were joining a church. You were. The paperwork just went through your marriage license. The South is the most religious stretch of the country by a wide margin. In the most recent Pew Religious Landscape data, Mississippi tops the nation with about half its adults classified as highly religious. South Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Arkansas all sit near the top. In Mississippi, roughly 3 in 4 adults say they pray daily. Church here isn't a Sunday activity. It's the calendar, the social network, the referral system, and the place your wife's family has sat in the same approximate pew since before you were an idea. If you're a believer, this is a homecoming. If you're not, you develop a skill, the reverent nod. You learn the words to hymns by osmosis. You learn that "we'll pray on it" can mean comfort, or it can mean the subject is now closed. and telling the difference is a survival skill. You learn that grace before dinner is not optional, that the pastor knows your name before you've met him, and that your attendance is quietly tallied by people who would be mortified to admit they're counting. Skip a couple of Sundays and no one confronts you. They just ask your wife, with tender concern, if everything's all right at home. Which is worse, here's the part nobody frames for you. The same region that promotes marriage hardest and prays over it most also posts some of the highest divorce rates in the country. The Bible Belt paradox. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama consistently near the top. In 2024, southern states filled most of the highest divorce tier. Researchers point to marrying younger, marrying more, on thinner economic ground. All that faith and pressure doesn't make the marriage easier. It just makes leaving it louder. So you sit in the pew, holding her hand where people can see, and you understand that down here love is not only a feeling, it's a public act, performed weekly, in good clothes, before God and the third cousins. And on the good days, you almost believe it too. 4. The kitchen runs the country. You assume the man of the house held some kind of authority. That's cute. In a traditional Southern family, real power lives in the kitchen, and it is almost always a woman holding it. Usually one who hasn't raised her voice in 40 years because she's never once needed to. Meet your wife's mother or her grandmother, or the aunt everyone defers to without ever explaining why. She runs things through a technology you cannot counter: food, memory, and mild disappointment. She will feed you until you love her and then use that love as leverage. She remembers everything: who was late, who didn't call, who seemed tired at Easter. And she deploys it with the precision of a woman who has been quietly managing 40 people since the Carter administration. You learn the hidden grammar fast. Bless your heart is not a blessing, it's a verdict, and the verdict is usually idiot, delivered so sweetly you thank her for it. That's different, means she hates it. Well, aren't you brave to try that? Means you have failed, and everyone at the table knows. We'll see means no. I'm not saying anything means she is about to say everything. And the food is not food. It is a language, and you are illiterate in it. Declining a plate isn't dietary, it's an insult. Cleaning your plate is a love letter. Asking for the recipe is a proposal. Bringing store-bought to a gathering is a confession that you were raised without values. You will watch your wife navigate this fluently, a native speaker, and realize she's been bilingual her whole life. One language for the world, one for the kitchen. Your wife, meanwhile, is becoming her mother in real time, and she'd deny it under oath. The same phrases, the same tilt of the head, the same terrifying ability to communicate profound displeasure while smiling and refilling your glass. You married the daughter. You are cohabiting with the lineage. You will try exactly once to win a disagreement with the matriarch directly. You will lose so gently you won't even feel it happen. You'll just notice, weeks later, that things went her way, that everyone's happy, and that somehow you volunteered. There's no throne in this house. There's a stove, and whoever stands at it was never going to lose to you. 5. Sunday is not optional. Somewhere in your old life, a weekend was 2 days you owned. That deed has been quietly transferred. You now hold a leasehold on Saturday, and no claim whatsoever to Sunday. Sunday is church, then Sunday dinner. And Sunday dinner is not a meal. It's a mandatory shareholders meeting with better cornbread. Every week, not most weeks, every week. You will float tentatively the radical idea of just us this Sunday, and your wife will look at you the way you'd look at someone who suggested skipping their own birth. It's not that you can't. It's that the cost is paid in a currency called her mother's feelings, and the exchange rate is brutal. Then come the tears. Sunday is baseline, then birthdays, real ones and the borderline ones, great aunts, second cousins, a baby you've met twice, then the holidays, which in a Southern family are not days but campaigns, with logistics, seating politics, and a low-grade Cold War over whose house hosts and whose dressing recipe is the real one. Thanksgiving alone can consume a marriage's entire diplomatic budget. You start doing math you're ashamed of. If we go to her mother's for Easter, we owe an appearance at the lake in June. If we skip the reunion, we're paying for it at Christmas. You are running a ledger of obligation, and the ledger never zeroes out, because affection down here is measured in attendance. The cruelty of it is that most of it is genuinely lovely. The food is extraordinary. The kids run wild in the yard. Somebody's uncle tells the same story he's told for 30 years, and everybody laughs anyway. You'll have moments at that crowded table when you understand, with a lump in your throat, exactly what your wife was trying to give you. And then it's 4 o'clock and you're still there, and the story's on its 4th lap, and you trade a small organ for one silent afternoon in your own house that no one has feelings about. You didn't lose your weekends. You donated them. Recurring, automatic. No cancellation option that doesn't cost you at the next reunion. 6. What will people think? There is a third party in your marriage, and it is not a person. It's the neighbors. It's the congregation. It's a diffuse, ever-present audience your wife has been performing for since girlhood, and now you're in the cast. Appearances are load-bearing here. The yard is kept not for you, but for the road. The Christmas card is a press release. The right response to, "How y'all doing?" is, "We're blessed," regardless of whether you spent last night not speaking to each other in a dark kitchen. You learn that problems are not for airing. They're for managing quietly, ideally without anyone ever knowing there was a problem, which is a wonderful way to make sure the problem never actually gets solved. This is where you meet the machine that keeps Southern marriages looking immaculate, while the paradox does its quiet work underneath. The region marries young and marries hard. Americans now marry later than ever, near 30 on average, but that clock runs earlier down here. And then everyone is expected to make it look effortless forever. So you both perform stability like it's a talent show. The photos are perfect, the routines are polished, the good night is polite, and whether there's anything left behind the performance is nobody's business, especially not yours to mention. You feel it most in the small betrayals. Your wife will side with her mother in front of the family and apologize to you in the car. You'll swallow a real feeling because saying it would embarrass everybody. You'll smile through a comment that stung because someone might be watching, and someone always is. Resentment down here doesn't explode. It gets folded into the laundry and put away neat. And the terrible, tender truth is that the performance isn't fake. She's not pretending to love you. She's just been taught that love and reputation are the same garment, and she cannot imagine wearing one without the other. When she says, "We're blessed," to the neighbor, part of her means it, and part of her is holding the whole family's dignity together with her bare hands. And you'll never be sure which part you married. You wanted a marriage. You got a marriage in a live studio audience. Nobody claps, but everybody's watching. 7. What it quietly does to you. Nobody warns you about the slow part. The welcome was loud. The erosion is silent. At some point, year 2, year 4, you notice you've stopped being a person with your own gravity and started being a coordinate in someone else's map. Your opinions on your own life now route through committee. Where you live is a family question. How you raise your kids is a family question, with the grandmother holding a permanent advisory seat she was never elected to. Your holidays, your Sundays, your money worries, your parenting, all of it is discussed gently by people who love you and would be genuinely hurt to learn you found it suffocating. You lose things so gradually you can't file a complaint. The friends from before, the ones a plane ride away, slowly fade because every free weekend is spoken for by obligation. Your own family of origin becomes the away team, visited rarely, always apologetically. Your name erodes into her husband, and you can't even resent it cleanly because everyone was so kind about taking it. This is the part the statistics gesture at without ever saying. The South's high divorce rates aren't a story about people who don't try. They're about people who married early and married hard, under enormous pressure to make it work and make it look effortless, with the whole county watching and the church keeping score. That's not a lack of love. That's a surplus of expectation poured into a marriage until you can't tell anymore where the two of you end and the family begins. You went looking for belonging. You found it. You just didn't know belonging had a bill and that it gets quietly deducted from the person you used to be. 8. Why you stay. And yet, you stay. Not because you're trapped, because on the good days, this life is the warmest thing you've ever stood inside. You stay because when your father got sick, 40 people you're barely related to showed up with food and stayed until the fear got smaller. You stay because your kids are growing up knowing every one of their cousins, sunburned and feral and held, in a way you never were. You stay because your wife, the one who becomes her mother and drives you quietly insane, is also the one who learned love as a full-contact team sport and never once let you feel alone in it. You stay because 6 miles from your door, there is always a light on, a plate ready, a pew with your approximate name on it. You spent your whole life afraid nobody would come if you called. Now the problem is the opposite, and you have finally learned that the opposite of loneliness is not freedom. It's obligation you'd choose again. You married a woman, you got a county, a congregation, a matriarch, a lifetime lease on Sundays, and a love so total it occasionally feels like a mild hostage situation. And when you're honest, in the car, in the dark, on the way home from the 4th gathering that month, you wouldn't hand the keys back. You just wish sometimes that the people who love you this much would love you a little more quietly. But that's not how they do it down here. And God help you, it's starting to feel like home. Marriage in the South isn't 2 people against the world. It's 2 people, plus everyone they've ever been related to, all pretending the casserole is about the casserole. Y'all take care now. You're one of us.